Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Centimetre Perfect AFL podcast. We have made it through 2 rounds of the 2025 AFL season, 2.5 if you count opening round. As of this round, though, I'll be able to say 2 3/4 in a very smug tone. I'm Jesse. That's Liam. Liam,
Hello.
Welcome back. We've made it
Thank
through
you.
where each team has played 2 games, and some have even played 3. And I think we're still very much in that phase where we're still trying to figure out where a lot of these teams actually lie for season 2025.
We've even got one who's only played 1. How crazy is that? We are. Every week seems to dish up something new, exciting, which we'll talk about in the game recaps coming up. But yeah, I'm still trying to get a grasp on where people are sitting this year. It's really difficult to work out. A couple of teams have got a much better idea. But yeah, so far the start of this season has delivered. It's given us some shocks, it's given us some things to talk about, which is what we need for this podcast, Jesse. Something to talk about. Isn't that great?
Well, in the era of what is a never-ending AFL news cycle, it's probably a good thing that the games have been excellent, because when we have daily programs that drone on for hours about the same topic, it does get a bit tedious. Luckily, we'll cover all those same topics here, so you get even more oversaturation to the AFL market. Make sure you are subscribed to CMPerfect_AFL on your preferred podcasting platform and YouTube. You can also follow us on social media. Reviews, comments, feedback, all appreciated. And for those on YouTube, please make sure you get involved with our Just the Tips tipping competition with our confidence points program for season 2025. I think to kind of preempt that episode being recorded after this one, Liam, interesting battle between us. I dropped a tip to you. No, you dropped a tip to me, but fortune favoured you with one of the key games of the round to just about negate that. So an interesting way to show that it doesn't necessarily matter how many tips you get right. It's the spread of your points that can make all the difference.
That's right, Jesse. So you did get one more tip right than me, but we actually drew on points. So that's where the confidence points comes into play. You know, it's not all about getting all the right teams, but if you spread your points just right, guess what? You're still in with a red hot crack, which is what I need. I need all the help I can get. You'll find out more about that on Just the Tips, as Jesse has mentioned. And you talk about all those other shows, Jesse. You know, this is a bit of a break from that. You know, a couple of guys, I just love my footy. You love your footy too, but you're a bit more knowledgeable. It's a good dynamic, I find. Not just 2 guys trying to outsource each other and outnews each other. It's just a couple of guys having a lovely chat. Breath of fresh air, if you ask me.
Well, I mean, I certainly don't mind getting a pat on the back from my co-host of the show that I also host. Pats on the back are welcome too. So I don't know why you're sitting there and not commenting if you're watching this on YouTube. Go into those comments and say something nice. Speaking of conversations and discussion, I think the biggest story in the AFL media off the field in season 2025 so far has been Jamarra Ugle-Hagan. Yeah. And tonight we wanted to dedicate a little bit of time to that, because ultimately it is a big story. Jamarra is a number 1 draft pick. He's a very talented player. But he's in this dilemma now where he's on the Ben Cousins scale of player quality and alleged, and we'll preface that with alleged off-field behaviours. He's probably the closest to Cousins on that axis that we've had in the last 2 decades. Now, I don't think we'll ever see a player with the ability of Ben Cousins and the troubles of Ben Cousins at the same time. I think, you know, to have the best player in the competition play as well as he did through personal demons and off-field behavioural issues, you know, it's never going to happen again. But so I think for a certain generation of fans, a younger generation, even to a lesser extent, someone like myself, I think this is really the first exposure to, you know, that troubled star dilemma. And, well, Liam, it doesn't really look it's getting any better for Jamarra at the moment.
No, it doesn't. But I feel like it could be all that stuff. We don't know alleged. We don't know what's going on with Jamarra and the Bulldogs. There's obviously some sort of disconnect there. Something is going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. But I think it speaks to a broader topic as well, which is like, and I've raised this before in previous years, that this is a job, right? And sometimes you don't love your job. And if you're in a position where you don't love what you're doing and where you're at, this could play into it as well. We've already had Tim Kelly come out this year and express that he's fallen out of love with the game. And the social pressures and the pressure that comes with being a sports star, not just an AFL star, but a sports star in general, I reckon can eat away at people quite significantly. So there could be a lot of that involved with this as well with Jamara, that he's just finding it hard to, adapt to the life of being an AFL star. Like, I've read a little story here where the Bulldogs have come out and says, well, basically a big issue over the weekend. He was at the NBL, the finals on Wednesday. He was at the NRL, but didn't go to the centenary celebration for the Doggies. Apparently, they don't care about any of that. It's just the fact that he posted that he was at the other events on social media and didn't give anything to the Dogs.
And it would appear to be a licensed premise as well, just to add to that.
Okay. So is it a case of Jamara is just like, you know what? Nah, this isn't for me. And he's expressing it in a way that's probably not the best way of expressing it, potentially? I don't know. Obviously, I don't know. I'm not Jamara Ugle-Hagan, so I can't get into his brain. But it's an interesting conversation to have in relation to the game and how it can affect the younger player.
I agree, and I think it is worth marinating on that thought, because we talk so much about mental health and we talk so much about safety in the workplace and making sure that people are comfortable coming to work. Now, it is worth the pretty key caveat that we're not talking about going to your job as the postman here. We're talking about an elite athlete. And, when you talk about that difference, you can be athletic. Like, I go for runs. So I would consider myself, at the very least, a little bit athletic. But compare me to, Eliud Kipchoge or, Andy Buchanan, who's Australia's top marathon runner. That difference in elitism almost is astronomical.
Mm.
And people like Andy Buchanan, Eliud Kipchoge, to quantify in that running term, they're running twice a day most of the time to make sure their fitness is at peak to go and run the time they want to do. So AFL players, we know, are in the gym just about every day, training just about every day, doing cardio just about every day. If you're in that environment, anything less than 100% commitment isn't going to cut it. And I think we've seen that across the league this season as well, where we've seen teams that maybe didn't have the best preseason for a number of reasons struggle. But that can just be maybe a complacency thing to an extent, or just a breakdown in communication or planning from the coaching staff. This is an entirely different situation with Jamara and the Dogs have to face it. We understand that there's been issues with Roy Lobb. It seems like that hatchet has been buried based on social media comments made by Lobb himself. There's issues with, or has been issues with Coach Luke Beveridge, and there's been issues with Captain Marcus Bontempelli. To me, Bont comes across as a serial professional, someone who will be in the gym twice a day. And I set off Siri when I said that, because I said cereal as opposed to Siri. Shut up, Siri. He is a serial professional. He is there gunning himself, running as hard as well. If you follow Christian Petrarca on social media, he's of the same mold at Melbourne. His whole life is his career. And, that doesn't have to be the case for everyone. For many people, it's not. Work-life balance is very important. But when you go down that elite athlete path, it's almost like you are sacrificing it. I think, emergency service personnel face that as well. Your police, your fireys, your ambos, they sacrifice a lot of the parts of their life for, let's not mince words here, for significantly fractional amounts of pay.
Mm.
They sacrifice their life. They're exposed to, things that are objectively worse than a mark being taken by their opposing defender. Airline pilots. Sure, there's a lot of passionate airline pilots. They do get paid reasonably well, but their life is their job. Really, look at flight attendants; they're paid very little in comparison to airline pilots, and even little again in terms of AFL players. This isn't a conversation about how employment should work in this country. That's a whole thing for another podcast. But the point I'm trying to make is people dedicate a lot more than Jamara Ugle-Hagan to their careers, whether it's the job that they desperately crave or not, for a fraction of the fee. And I think for the Dogs, I think the conversation has to shift away from when does Jamara feel comfortable to come back, to a real cold water take of, can the Dogs afford this variant of Jamara Ugle-Hagan? And I don't think the answer to that question is yes.
I mean, everyone has or takes work differently, right? Regardless, like those examples that you gave, you're going to have obviously some people.
We probably have different attitudes to work ourselves, Liam, in different ways.
Yeah, I know that I probably don't take it. Like I take my work seriously, but I don't take work seriously, if that makes sense. Like for me, work is something that I do to earn a crust. But when I'm there, I do my best. But
yes, at
the end of the day, it's my job, and I come back, and I much more prefer doing things like this, which is fair to say. Where I know that you obviously have a different mindset to it all. I think
that's fair. I mean, I apply myself as best I can, and I do like try to focus on whatever I'm doing, whether that's this podcast, whether that's my actual job, whether that's going for a run. You know, I like to go at things full tilt, but there's no, I guess, right or wrong approach to that, so long as the end goal is achieved. Right now, Jamara's end goal is not being achieved.
But then there's the other side of that coin, which is where you're in a job that you aren't enjoying, and there's something about that job that you do not like, and who's to say you should just stay in and cop it? Do you know what I mean? And so if he's at a point where he's just like, you know, I don't want to be here. This is not making me happy. Something's going, like, I need to change something up. Like, that's okay too. But of course, because he's in the position that he's in, obviously everyone's watching what he's doing. No one's watching us, Jesse. Well, I mean, hopefully people are watching this. Please watch this, listen to this. Thank you very much for being here. But you know what I mean? People aren't over our shoulders at work or scrutinizing everything that we do, like an AFL player, like a sports star would be. So, but where does that line stop in relation to how a human takes on that work pressure?
Sure, but that doesn't answer the question of, is the employer in the situation the Western Bulldogs, you know, at what point does it become too much for them?
Well, I mean, this is where it gets tricky when it comes to sports.
Because we're not talking about a couple of sickies here and there, or, you know, a bad day in the office, which happens to everyone.
No.
Jamara Ugle-Hagan is not playing football. He's nowhere near match fitness because he's barely training.
Of course. But he's an asset to that club. So it's not a case of is
he right now?
Well, yeah, financially speaking.
I think his value is certainly decreasing.
Well, yeah, but it's still something that the Bulldogs will need to foster and need to hold on to in order to, you know, get as much as it sucks to say, sports is trading in athletic humans. That's what it is.
It is
for our entertainment. And so if you have an asset, even if that value is decreasing, you're going to want to hold on to it and do your best to nurture something out of that, which is probably where the Dogs are at the moment. They're probably having a bit of a wait and see approach and then being like, okay, where's this all going to end up in the wash? But it's not like a job regular.
It's like a real job, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
It's not a 9 to 5.
No. But if you don't rock at a 9 to 5 and don't perform, you know, I mean, to be fair, as the years go past, it is harder to get rid of people if they're not performing, but you still can. You still can. Anyway, I guess what are we talking about, Jesse?
Well, we can talk about this all night, but I think I'll close up with one thought. Regardless of your opinion, Lee, my opinion, the listener's opinion, any of the other AFL media's opinion, the only opinion that matters right now is Jamara Ugle-Hagan. And the ball is in his court to decide what he wants to do. My personal take is I think he needs to get out of Victoria. I think without buying into too many of the rumours, and there is enough rumours circulating about Jamara Ugle-Hagan to fill innumerable internet forums. And in fact, that has filled innumerable internet forums already. But even just assuming none of those rumours are true, and it's just a relationship difficulty between the Dogs and himself, I still think getting out of Victoria is the best answer. I think Queensland, New South Wales, I think along that eastern seaboard, I think there's a lot better environments for him for a reset that he would get from moving within Victoria. I don't think he'll play for Western Bulldogs again, personally. I'd be surprised if he does.
Be cool.
I think we're at that point.
Fair enough. Well, it's an interesting conversation to have. Obviously, not the one you'll find, you know, in the news and stuff like that. They're going to want to find a piece, but I think there's a definite human element to it that needs to be explored and discussed, because we all have moments where we just, you know, we're not there, and that's fine. But without knowing exactly what's going on, hard to say anything else other than, you know, let's hope they work it out one way or the other for everyone involved. As long as everyone's healthy, that's the main thing. Jesse, not much else to talk about on the news front. It's pretty quiet for the tribunal. I'm pretty sure. I don't think there's anything come out of that.
No, Brisbane Brisbane getting a new stadium in 8 years' time. That's exciting for them.
When do they get to move to play at People First Stadium for 2 years?
It's all. I think we'll hold off on that because there's huge changes being made to the whole Olympics Games structure for the ground structure. So we're not sure. But what's interesting is 63,000 seat stadium.
Ooh.
Gabba holds about 40. So clear a big upgrade for the Brisbane Football Club. In 2017, when Brisbane were bad, their average home crowd was 16,000, which looks bad in a 40,000 seat stadium.
True.
In an Optus-sized stadium, that's going to look awful if that happens again.
Well, I mean, that's the difference though, right? We had the upgrade because Subiaco was about 44, going up to Optus, which is what, 60-something, 64, 65?
Just about 60 flat, I think.
60 flat. So, but we have a footy crowd over here. Brisbane is a different kettle of fish. So unless they are successful, yeah, it could be interesting to see. And also we have two teams here to fill it out every other weekend, whereas they've got a fortnightly kind of rotation. So
we usually get 40. Which I think is bad, but we get 40.
Yeah, but when they're doing well, and this goes for the Eagles as well, that pumps up, which makes sense in any sport. If your team's not doing that great, you might be more, you might not want to go as much because do the gardening because who wants to see your team lose? But on the weekend, I think this weekend, the Dockers got about as many as the Eagles did the week before. So, 44-ish.
2 hot days as well.
Oh, yeah, stonking hot, which is another point of we'll talk about that when we talk about the Brisbane versus West Coast game because that was something in itself. Anything else? Any more mascots get unveiled this week, Jesse?
I think we just skip straight past Ramen or whatever his name is and get straight into Thursday night footy.
Ramen. Now I'm hungry. All right, let's go. We're going to start, Jesse, with Thursday night. We had at the MCG Carlton 8-12-60, Hawthorn 12-8-80 in front of 62,735 at the G. Once again, Jesse, cue the dance. Fun, Hawthorn win. Fun, Hawthorn win. When are we going to not do that this year? My goodness gracious me. Another win for the Hawks. Pretty cool, calm and collected Hawks, don't you think?
I do, and I still don't think we've seen extended periods of Hawthorn's third gear either. I think we've seen 3 professional performances against sides that they should be beating. But for the majority of the Essendon game, they weren't threatened. I felt on Thursday night, Carlton didn't really lay a glove on them for the most part. They absolutely had their chances to, but they didn't take them, and that always kept Carlton at arm's length. We saw it briefly in the Sydney game in opening round where they were under the pressure in rainy conditions and they responded and they kicked away. I think there's more to come from this Hawthorn side. I look at guys like Ginnivan, even Newcomb, I'll throw in here, and he was best on, I think, on Thursday night. But I think the first 2 games, we hadn't seen, I think, his best footy. We've seen guys like Will Day step up, Marbury Chol step up. They've had that next bracket down from your elite Newcomb Sicily band. That bracket is that Lloyd Meek had a phenomenal opening round. So I think if they can get that synergy where everyone's firing, they did have at the back end of last season, I think with this extra steeliness they seem to have acquired in the offseason, especially with the additions of Battle and Barras, I think they're more than just fun Hawthorn win. I think Hawthorn are really good again. They were clearly getting better, and we just kind of said, they're fun. And now all of a sudden, oh dear, they're actual legitimate, bona fide top 4 contenders.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, they are. And this is a game where Meek was, I think, fairly handily beaten by De Koning.
I agree.
Yeah, quite easily, I would say. And even then, they still got everything done. And I'm not saying it all starts it's all about the ruck, but it's a very important part of the game for the clearances and whatnot. But I think that was a big turning point it was a big point of the game. I thought was that ruck battle, and De Koning win it easily. Cripps and Hewitt, fine, they were pretty good hands. But the Carlton injury list just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Well, Cripps was gassed.
Yeah.
Cripps was absolutely exhausted because he's doing the work of 3 players.
Well, that's it. He's trying to carry the entire team. I mean, you got one person trying to do all that work. It's not going to bode well. As much of a superstar as Cripps is, there's only so much he can do. Where to for Carlton from here, Jesse?
they're in a perilous spot. There was graffiti in Thornbury that's done the rounds in the last couple of days with Sackvoss painted on a street corner, like on the road on a street corner. I think we're at a real point where there's probably a few teams now legitimately having to consider the open market for coaches. And I think even though I would still say Michael Voss is the best of that group, I still wouldn't be sitting pretty if I was Voss and feeling comfortable in my position, because Carlton, I don't want to say Carlton deserve better because that's, holier than thou attitude, but Carlton as a club have been demonstrably unsuccessful for 30 years. A decade of that was their own doing with the salary cap meltdown, but they've not recovered from that, really. Carlton fans have had enough. They have clearly had enough. The vitriol and the tension at games when Carlton aren't winning has progressively gotten worse since 2022 because they've gone out of that period where they were just bad all the time. Now they've got a dual Brownlow medalist. They got Sam Walsh as a great pick in the draft. They recruited Adam Chera from Fremantle, recruited Hewitt from Sydney. They've gone and gotten players to improve the squad at the top end, not just in that middle part, which is what they were doing a lot in the latter part of the 2010s. They were building that GWS army of okay players and just not going anywhere. But this now is a team that on paper has top-end talent. But can you look at a guy like Adam Chera and say that he's actually improved since he left Fremantle? I genuinely don't think he has.
I'd actually say he's gone the other way, to be honest with you. I think he was a bit of a gun for Freo. And then since he's gone to Carlton, I don't think he's done a lot. And there's been talks in the media of him being shipped on again because he's not doing what he needs to be done, what he needs to do. I mean, Blake Acres, I think, has got better since he's gone to Carlton.
I agree.
But then he did have a great game on Thursday, and neither did Charlie Curnow. I know it was his first game back from a lot of injuries, but he still seemed to struggle a little bit, old Charlie.
Well, I was alarmed that Curnow played, to be honest. And it really reminded me of Logan McDonald in the 2024 grand final.
Yeah.
I was alarmed that Curnow was on that field because he clearly was not right to go. And I understand that players, look at Michael Voss, I want to play. I'm fit. I'm good to go. I get that. But that's a big risk. And with a guy like Charlie with his extensive injury history and what he means to the Carlton Football Club, I know they didn't have Mackay, but it can't have been worse without Curnow.
Yeah.
It can't have been because they were not a forward threat. Jesse Motlop had probably his best game in Navy Blue, certainly in a long time. He was their most threatening forward, I felt.
Yep. Hard to argue. And I think it just goes to show that finishing power that a lot of the teams this year, Carlton included, just don't have is still there. And that's one thing that stood out with this game, as it has for the other three. As you mentioned, like Hawthorn just stay cool. Doesn't matter. Like they'll just finish off, clutch. They're a clutch team, Jesse.
I said this to you on Sunday after the Freo game, Lim. 12 goals at the moment is good for 10 wins. And then the quality outside of that, if you're a good side and you can defend well, you'll probably win about 15 or 16. Look at this. Hawthorn with 12 goals, really unthreatened by a wayward Carlton. As we go through a lot of these games, there's a couple of blowouts, but most of the losing teams don't cross 12 goals.
Yeah.
So if you're not kicking 3 goals a quarter, you're struggling and you're probably not winning.
Doesn't make for great football either. Shall we move on to the next game, Jesse?
Let's, because this is a good game. I enjoyed this.
You loved it? Friday, March 21st, the Bulldogs 10-10-70, defeated by the Magpies 10-16-76 in front of 78,027 at the MCG. Jesse, this one is going to be all you. Please take it away.
Fantastic game of footy and a game that was in the balance from the moment the ball was bounced to the final siren. Now, this game certainly had its fair share of controversy. There were some umpiring decisions that did not make the Bulldogs fans very happy. We're going to mostly steer clear of that because I think one thing I'd like this podcast to not be this year is an umpiring win zone. That's pub conversation. I think and we did it a bit last season, and I think at times. And look, it's not to say that we won't talk about if the umpiring is just genuinely galling to the point of confusion. Like I didn't think the umpiring was very good on Friday night. But that just seems to be the standard now.
Yeah.
So what do you want me to do about it, really? Taking the positives, Sam Darcy.
Yeah.
I guess this as a kind of a point 2B from our early conversation from Jamara. I'm happy to let Jamara go if I've got Sam Darcy.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm not worried.
They feel a similar role, don't they? Darcy's a young kid who's looks amazing. Big fella, tall, lanky, but can take a clunk, can kick a goal. Of what I saw, he looked very good.
Liberatore, I think, really he really does, I guess, underline the Footscray spirit, and he has to look at his heritage. He is very much a Bulldogs boy through and through, and he really did stand up. I actually thought, for the most part, all the Dogs players were up for this game. They just ran into a good Collingwood side who made it harder for themselves than they probably needed to. Nick Dacos had the footy on a string for most of the game. I thought Darcy Cameron arguably had the best game of his career. I thought it was an excellent game from Darcy Cameron. He looked like a dominant tool in a way that I don't really recall seeing before from him. He's always been a solid to serviceable player. But even across the body of work from this season, he does look like he's taken the extra next step, which for Collingwood I think is really important. We have to talk about Cox v. Lobb.
Oh, yes.
that was very unfortunate time. So the MRO is satisfied that there was nothing untoward in that. I am glad about that because that would be a case of punishing the result rather than the action. Now, that's not to say that players should be whacked in the head at all costs at all times, but I don't feel like that was intentional.
So this is an interesting conversation though. Like week on week, we said last week in the podcast, like we'll see what happens with the rest of the season when it comes to other teams and other players and other games and stars, et cetera, et cetera. Like I would argue that this was probably more punishable than the Archer one, just based on head-high contact, et cetera, like in terms of visual, like what could Lobb have done differently?
Could he have stopped or could he have withdrawn his fist?
Exactly.
It went straight into Cox's glasses.
But I don't. Yeah, they did. They flew off. But I also don't hate that this wasn't punished because it was clear what the action was, what he was trying to do. It was an unfortunate accident and that it happened. And correct me if I'm wrong. I actually don't think that many of the Collingwood players came up to remonstrate with Lobb afterwards. I think
McCreary had a word, but that was about all of it.
A little bit of a jumper tug and then he called it a day. But, I'm happy to see that one fly.
Bobby Hill, I think, looks like he could be in for a big season this year. I don't think he was at his best in 2024, but from limited touch, I think he had about 12 touches, but he kicked 2 goals, looked lively. His breakaway on transition in the second quarter, I believe, when his teammate got the ball, and I apologize, I forgot who delivered it. It might have been Crisp who delivered it, but got it in the defensive half. Bobby himself was in the defensive half, and he just went.
Yeah.
Just full sprint for 100 metres to get in the position he needed to be. That's good football, and behaviour like that will set up teams for success this season. Both sides could have had more than the 10 goals. Some horrible inaccuracy in front of goal, some bizarre decision-making as well. But Collingwood get the points. A slightly undermanned Dogs, I think, take home a lot of credit too.
Well, this is a point I wanted to raise, Jesse. The Dogs are looking very, very good already. I'm missing a lot of talent. This could be a really scary, like mid to end of the season for the Dogs once they've got a healthy list, which hopefully they do have. If they can do this and come close for most of their games, they've won one. Yeah, they beat Kangas last week. Yes,
they beat Kangas.
But they look good. And I think it's going to be interesting to see once they get those players back, if they continue to look good. I'm sure they will. I'm sure they'll look better. That's all I got to say about that. Jesse, anything else about this game before we move on?
Interesting to see what the additions do bring. I think Bontempelli will disrupt the current midfield structure, as he will. He's arguably their best player. And that'll be interesting to see, because I actually think they're doing quite well in the guts at the moment, the Dogs. So interesting to see if that dynamic actually makes them worse in terms of their setup and their structure. We've seen it before. It absolutely can happen.
Yep, it can. Let's move on to Saturday at the MCG. The Bombers 15-10-100, defeated by the Adelaide Crows 25-11-161 in front of 46-688. Well, there you go, Jesse. Keep 15 goals, lose by 10. Where's your theory now, mate? What's going on?
Well, my theory is if nobody defends, you can kick as much as you want. And no one was defending in this game. I really hope Ross didn't watch this, or J-Lo for that matter, because they would have been absolutely horrified. And I mean, to be fair, I was kind of horrified too because the defending was awful. Both sides wanted to get up and at it, which I respect. Surprised me that Essendon did, given they don't really have a forward line at the moment, but hey, they went for it. But Adelaide, I mean, this game was never in doubt, ever in doubt. As soon as Adelaide got a couple of goals ahead in the first quarter, they weren't going to drop this game. What we're seeing now is their upper echelon of players, your Dawsons, your Rochellis, your Rankins, these quality players who have been underrated for the last couple of seasons, it's going to become very difficult to ignore how good they are when this team is consistently kicking 18 plus goals, and they've done that so far this season, and playing in such a way that confidence is sky high. Phil Thorpe, Fogarty, even Tex, Walker look like they're assured and working together well as a tall forward line. You know, you're rotating Rankin and Rochelli through there. You're getting your smalls involved. I think Neil Bullen's been a great addition to this side. They look like they've found their groove, and you've got to be aware when sides like this get on a bit of a roll, they can shoot up the ladder higher than you might look at them on paper and say, oh, these guys are actually, they're good, but they're not great. But all of a sudden, I mean, you only need to look back as far as last year. You know, the sneering comments about Hawthorn as a ladder, oh, well, they don't have that good of a list. How are they doing this? And they continue to win games. Adelaide easily could be the Hawthorn of 2025. Easily. Yep. In fact, you know, I think right now expectations of Adelaide have gone from being, you know, look for finals to, you know, top four looks like it's for the taking this year. Let's go after it and let's make something happen. I understand it's only been 2 games, but go for it.
I think Fogarty, whenever he gets the ball, if he takes a mark in the forward 50, no matter what he is, I'm just expecting he kicks that. Yeah. That guy's got a beautiful kick. A beautiful kick. It'll be interesting to see what's going to happen when they come up against some quote unquote better competition. Obviously, they've had a couple of easier games to start the season, more or less. So it'll be the proof will be in the pudding then, and I'm not too sure how long we have to wait for that. We will find out later on. It's probably not next week, but you know what? I'm just going to scrub ahead real quick, and let's have a look. When have they got a tough one? Suns could be difficult. One more. Cats. Here we go. Cats in gather round. That should be a good litmus test if the Suns isn't, depending on how they kick on this week. But yeah, I think you'd be very happy if you're a Crows fan at the moment because they are looking the goods. Absolutely. Anything else to add for this one, Jesse? My boy.
Draper sub again. I think we'll start seeing him get proper minutes. He looks AFL ready already.
Draper sub. That sounds familiar. Shall we move on to the next game?
Yes.
All right. Saturday at the Adelaide Oval, we had the Port Adelaide Power 21-14, 140, defeating the Richmond Tigers 9-14, 68. A bit of a reality check, I think, for the Richmond Tigers, and a good turnaround of form for the Port Adelaide Power. I mean, what's that? It's a 91-point drubbing turned into a, how's my math, 72-point victory. That's a pretty good turnaround week on week. Granted, the opponents were slightly different.
It makes the bar graph aficionados shiver when they see the swings in that. Yeah, I think a good game, a great game for Port. And you look at, I want to single out Jace Burgoyne in this conversation because he was excellent. And if Port are going to take that next step in season 2025, and look, I know we probably all reacted quite shocked in the way they were dispatched by Collingwood in round 1. But, you know, pre-season, they have been talked about as a top 4 contending side. So if you're willing to give a mulligan on round 1 and you still say that's the expectation set of this team, then they need guys like Burgoyne to take that next step. Georgiades had his most assured game in the forward line. I think potentially helped that he was in it against a Noah Bolterless Richmond defence. But he looked assured and he looked confident and he needs to parlay that into success in the coming weeks. Rozier was excellent as always. They've also got outs. Port, mostly speaking of Zach Butters here. So there is potential for them to continue to improve. And, you know, Travis Boak is someone who feels like they've been around forever. And, you know, really, in the grand scheme of things, he has been around forever. Yeah. He's still putting in good performances. We talk about how ageless Scott Pendlebury is, and in many ways he is. But I wouldn't say Travis Boak's all that far behind him on that scale.
No, I think you kind of forget about Boki a little bit just because of the Vic bias. Oh, Vic bias. But you tend to hear about Pendles a lot more than you do Boki. Obviously, Pendles is pushing up to that games record, which is something that is a bit more newsworthy. But I mean, Boki's can't be far away from 400, surely.
392, I think it was on.
Not far at all. He'll get to this year, which is a huge accomplishment. But yeah, no, it's a shame to see the Tigers, maybe not back it up like we might have hoped against Carlton.
I don't think they were terrible though. I just think they were playing a top 4 side, and they're kids. And if you have a bad start, it's a long, long way back.
I think that's the thing we got to remember, right? Is that they are kids. It's still a young team, still coming through. First round was fun to see, but I think this is probably more realistic to what we can expect for when they're playing the top teams of the competition, for sure.
Taranto's got a lift as well. One last point. He can't be putting in these performances as a marquee player.
Yeah.
Of a side that's expected to struggle. I think in a similar vein to Tim Kelly, you've got to lead by example. And right now, I don't feel like Tim Taranto is leading by example for the Richmond Footy Club. They invested heavily in him. And, Kane Corn said during the week, calling him a top 150 player was generous. I think if he's going to play like that each week, Kane's 100% right.
Mm-hmm. Can't argue. Let's move on to the next game of the round. Probably the upset of the round, I would say. Let's hope we'll probably have one every round. Let's hope so. Keep it interesting. At Marvel, the Saints 15-8-98 defeating the Geelong Cats 13-13-91 in front of 46-688. Not a bad little crowd for the Saints there, Jesse. Something that, we don't normally say. We normally, have issues with the Saints crowd and them not showing up. But 46 is pretty healthy at Marvel.
Yeah, and they should absolutely be proud of that. It's a great result for the Saints. And I actually got the sense that they played better as a result of the crowd. It's hard to, feed off the energy of a game when no one's there. But I think, St Kilda played a brilliant game of football on Saturday night. And they did it with Ross Lyon reminding everyone that he is one of the best brains in the competition. And the way that St Kilda approached getting that ball forward and who they were targeting with their ball movement going forward, it disrupted Geelong, significantly disrupted Geelong, to the point where the Cats didn't actually have an answer for 3/4 of that game. And St Kilda were comfortably ahead. Now, they did run out of steam. And to be honest, and it's brutally honest, I feel like Geelong kicked themselves out of the game in that last 5 minutes rather than St Kilda holding them out. There was a couple of appalling entries inside 50. Wangani Miller made a last-ditch save on the goal line, which was, full credit.
Yep.
But St Kilda, they get the points. And no one cares about who should have got the points in 5 years' time when they look back on the season 2025. St Kilda got the points. Much needed win for them. Much needed strong performance from them as well. And they did play well. They played good football for 2.5 of the 3 hours, which, as it turns out, is good enough to win when you're kicking 15 goals a week. Now, I got the sense in the Adelaide game that St Kilda were shifting away fractionally from a defensive game style. That holds water based on what we saw on Saturday night. I think St Kilda, they get the reputation of being a very defensive, structured team. And I think, with a Ross Lyon side, that comes with 14 years of data to back that up. But what we're seeing from St Kilda this season is very different to what we saw from the Saints for the most part of 24. I think we saw glimpses towards the end of the year. But I think if you're a St Kilda fan, there's renewed hope here. Because you've got players who can influence the game. Wangani Miller can influence a game. We saw Jack Higgins, who's has his ups and downs, but when he's on, can influence a game. Yeah. Liam Henry can influence games when he's back in the side. Brad Hill was, a different player to who turned up at Adelaide Oval for round 1.
Oh, yeah.
So there's pieces for the Saints. Now we need to see consistency.
I think it highlights as well, from what I saw of this game, is that, St Kilda didn't look like themselves. It was more like fast-paced, running, energetic football, which I think speaks to Ross's ability to adjust maybe his normal game style to where the competition is going. I think a lot of the other coaches, that was a sweeping generalization, some of the other coaches could definitely learn a thing or two about this, because he's able to adjust on the fly. Like I haven't seen players diving for spoils and smothers. I think, what's his name? Walker? No, not Walker. Webster. There was one mighty save where Geelong had the ball 15 metres out on a slight angle. One of the Geelong players went to snap it through and just chucked his whole body at it and spoiled it out of bounds. Like that's the kind of things that wins you games. And if you've done all that hard work in the first 3 quarters to build such a massive lead, even if you're tired, to see them throw themselves at everything to maintain hold that lead was really, it's nice to see. That's what you want out of your footy. So no, kudos to the Saints. Very good win indeed. Anything else to add about this one, Jess, before we move on to Sunday footy?
Does Ross have Chris Scott all figured out in a way that no one else does? Because his record at Fremantle against Geelong was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
His record, and more so at Marvel with St Kilda against Geelong, has been excellent. I just get the sense that we're talking about 2 very good coaches here. And let's not kid ourselves. We're talking about 2 of the best 5 coaches in the league. We talk Chris Scott and we talk Ross Lyon.
Yep.
They've had some great battles over the year.
Mm-hmm.
I get the sense that if the Saints were to make the 8, with Ross, they're in with a shot.
Oh, giving all those
With
Saints
Ross.
fans hope. With Ross. Okay.
Well, I think we talk about skill gaps between players and coaches on this podcast. I do think that Ross is a higher level than the Saints list. But in a final, when you need to be tactically spot on, that can make a difference.
Well, early days, big call, Jesse, but we'll see how the rest of the year
I'm not
plays
saying
out.
they're going to make the 8. I'm saying if they were to make the 8.
Jesse's said that St Kilda is going to win the premiership this year. That's what I heard. That's what everyone else said too, Jesse.
You are getting old because you need your ears checked.
Ain't that the truth? All right, let's move on to Sunday now with a game that might have shocked everybody if it wasn't for the fact that the young West Coast Eagles
So the last quarter happened.
Yeah, the last quarter happened. Sunday, March 23, Brisbane 14-10-94, defeating a very, very exuberant Eagles 11-9-75 in front of 30,012 at the Gabba. Now, we had this game on, the pub had the game on before we went to the Freo Sydney game. I was watching a little bit before I left to start the day, the footy day, and I tell you what, the Eagles had their number in the first 3 quarters, more or less. The Lions are obviously a very good team. They're going to hang around, but they got down by like 30-odd points, 5 goals in the first quarter. And everyone was like, hang on a second. What's happening here? What is this weird Twilight Zone year of football are we having? But unfortunately, they weren't able to run the game out. They ran out of steam, which makes sense because obviously they were throwing everything in at the Lions. But this is where we have to bring up the point of contention about this match, Jesse. The talking point, if you will, the fact that they were playing a game in what is effectively still summer in Brisbane at midday. Now, scheduling-wise, probably doesn't make a lot of sense because it was sweltering hot. It was crazy hot up in Brisbane for this game, which would not have had any, would have done the Eagles any favours. I mean, the Lions either. I saw Lachie Neale on his haunches in the second quarter because it was that warm. What's your take on all that, Jesse?
Honestly, I think it's a bit overblown.
Yeah, all right.
I think we're looking for stories, and it goes back to the point I made at the top of the show about how we do have a 24/7 AFL news cycle, so everything has to be microanalyzed. Was it ideal this game was played in warm conditions from a player welfare perspective? No. Did anybody die? No. Footy has always been a sport, with the exception of Lightning, which is fair enough, that has been played in all conditions.
True.
I know, I understand the argument that this could have been scheduled better, and I agree with that argument. But if you've got a problem with the fixturing, say it when the fixture comes out. Don't wait for what the weather forecast decides it's going to be, and then complain.
Well,
if you've got an issue,
how do you know? How do you know what the weather's going to be when you do the fixture in the start of the year or late last year?
A fortnight ago in Brisbane, we lost the game because of a cyclone or a tropical low. And now it's hot and people are losing their minds that it was fixtured in March. I think the bigger issue
I don't think it was March. It wasn't March is the question. Why wasn't it put later in the evening when it was cooler or on a different time slot? So Saturday evening, for example, when there was going to be, not the stinking hot sun coming down. I think that was the argument, not so much March. Otherwise, Brisbane wouldn't have a game until ever. It's always hot in Brisbane.
Brisbane, but their home ground is the Adelaide Oval. No, I understand why people are upset because someone made the point and now it's done the rounds. And I understand why individual players might be a little bit miffed by it too. That's fine. But this is not a story. This isn't a big conspiracy against big Brisbane or big West Coast set up by big Andrew to go and disrupt the team's momentum. Fremantle have played in some of the most appalling conditions. West Coast have played in some of the most appalling conditions. Brisbane, there was a Fremantle-Brisbane game in 2009 at Subiaco Oval that was played underwater. So why are we scheduling games in Perth in June? Like, if we do this argument, we're going to have a week for the season.
Yeah, it's true.
And the AFL want to go for 6 months of the year. So at some point, something's going to have to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's my take on it.
That's a good take. It's a good take. It makes sense. And like no one knows what the weather's going to do. It's unpredictable. Case in point. But hey, back to the game. Your takeaways from the game, Jesse.
I don't think I saw a bit of reaction from Brisbane supporters this game. We played rubbish. We were bad. We can't defend a premiership like this. And I don't know if I agree. We have seen innumerable games where teams that have been considered will be poor will go and provide a shock to a team that is expected to be much higher up on the ladder. At the end of the day, Brisbane had a half of football to catch up from a dreadful first half and did it in the end with relative ease.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's an issue for them. West Coast kicked 5 goals in the first quarter, kicked 6 for the rest of the match.
Yeah.
No issues with that from a Brisbane point of view. West Coast get the benefit of saying we didn't get flogged at probably the hardest game on paper this season, Brisbane. We actually led for most of the game. For most of the game. So there's huge positives there. Liam Baker looks like he's really adjusted to life well. Ryan Marrick looks like he's going to be a solid defensive option for West Coast. I think Tim Kelly had a much better game too. A Waterman-less forward like kicking 11 goals for West Coast isn't a bad result, in all honesty. I do think we need to talk about Harley Reid, though.
Oh yeah, what is it? What is it? It's a week in the West, Jesse.
It is a week.
It's a week in the West. We got to talk about Harley.
Now, I don't know if he got heat stroke when he did that, or what the deal was. Maybe that's the whole issue. The Harley got heat stroke, and everyone's really cross about that. I have 2 thoughts on this. Thought number 1, I don't necessarily mind Harley reminding the Brisbane crowd of his draft pick status because Harley feeds off that. He is a player that needs to be the center of attention. And ultimately, I feel he plays better when he's in a hostile environment. Or at least I don't think he gets nervous in a hostile environment. He may get hot-headed and make a mistake, so it may tip the other way on the scale. But I don't think he's going to go into his shell at any point. I think he's a player that you want on the grand final stage when the time is right. However, my biggest issue with Harley Reid's game on Sunday is not his draft pick number reminders to the Brisbane crowd. It's the fact that he gave away 7 free kicks.
Wow. Okay.
That's a lot of free kicks to be giving away. And some of those were just technical and skill-based free kicks. Others was just poor judgment. And I'm concerned that he's going to become a real target. And I think it was St Kilda last year who exposed how easy it is to rattle Harley Reid on the field with niggle and with graft put into him. And he's going to have to find a better way to respond than poor tackling technique and fraction too late contact on players, because it's not going to work out well long term.
Yeah, fair shot. Let's move on to the next game. Second game on Sunday. The North Melbourne Kangaroos. Look at this one. 19-11, 125, smacking the Melbourne Demons 9-12, 66, albeit that due to 6 goals in 6 minutes in the final quarter by the Kangaroos. To be fair, that still means they were 4 goals up when they started that onslaught. I think this is really nice to see for North Melbourne because they've been, maligned for failing to finish games. They've been maligned for losing in the last quarter, being up by 51 against Collingwood last year and then throwing it all away at the death. This was a complete reversal of that, which I think has the potential to unlock something in their psyche to help them through that barrier, that mental barrier. Because that's a huge win in the end. 10 goals is massive. Melbourne might be on the precipice. I know we were talking about them being, not a contender this year, but holy moly,
that's a forward, didn't I?
You did, but that's capitulation. That's a capitulation. How do you go from 19 points down? Let's forget the Dockers game from round 1 existed. How do you go from 19 points down to lose by 10 goals? How does that happen?
With a complete lack of focus. This is a great result for North, and I don't want to undersell North's performance with what I'm going to say about Melbourne, because what we saw from North is their top talent. So the Cherries, their top Sheasel. I think we're seeing some real signs from O'Sullivan. We're seeing that in Larkey as well. We're seeing that bracket of stars or potential stars for North Melbourne. Even with LDU, I actually don't think had that great of a game. But that top core of players, those players you build a list around, all delivered for the most part. And that's the first step for a rebuilding team. Because there's no point taking little steps with your stars and bigger steps with your role players, because then you win 8 games a season. When you're doing a rebuild, you need the players you've hitched the wagon to. So I know Wardlaw's injured, but your Sheasels, your Wardlaws, your McKerchers, your Cherries, your Larkies, these guys need to be taking that step from good to very good to star, ideally star to elite for at least 1 or 2 of them. And right now, Cherry is in the elite bracket. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Sheasel is very close to that elite bracket. Mm-hmm. And as far as key forwards go, I don't think there's a more underrated key forward in the competition right now than Nick Larkey. Whether that makes him elite or not is a different conversation. I think he's probably still in that star category. Mm-hmm. But it's not unreasonable to say that one of Wardlaw, McKercher, O'Sullivan can also make that step into the elite category. And then what do we have on our hands with this North side at that point? Because Powell, Zerha, 2 of the 3 players in the best that you've put together, Liam, they're probably going to cap at that very good range. So that's promising too.
I quite like Joe Simpkins as a captain as well. Simpkins as a captain. I think he's a good fit for that young side. And being guided by some of the older heads as well, like Jack Darling was his 300th game. So, nice to see him get a goal and cap it off with a win. But I think he's a good choice. I think they're going in the right direction, North. I think if you're a North supporter, you'd be very happy with how everything's progressing so far. And hopefully it just continues to go on the up. Shall we move on to our last game of the round, Jesse?
No.
Well, the good thing is it's the last game. And we know what our cap is for time, which means how long you got and how long I got to talk about this game.
Well, you always go first in this. So you read the score and then I will stay quiet until you call upon me.
All right, sir. All right. Freo 9-11-65 defeated by the Sydney Swans 9-14-68 in front of 43,882 at Optus Stadium. I'm pretty sure we both stood there staring at the ground for about 15 minutes after everyone else had left, just wondering what the heck we had just watched. Because this game, albeit close, was not a good game. It was not a good game of football. Like there were parts that were exciting, like, taking a mark about a second after the siren had gone. Oh no. But my God, man, like this Freo team looks like they want to break out and run. And Shea was a great little addition to the midfield. I thought he showed some pace, still getting his head around the forward line. Obviously, there's a couple of times he tried to dance around and out of situations and got tackled. I don't mind so much because he's looking like that live wire that we need through the middle. Because for the most part, it just seems like at every opportunity, and I mentioned this last week when I was talking about them just taking that second too long, they always seem like they're thinking of a plan. Like there's a plan that they're meant to be following in the game. This is my thoughts on what I saw. That plan, or what they're trying to think about, is taking away that ability for them to run and go and just think on the fly, just go, which is what all good teams are able to do at the moment, is just run with confidence. Trust where their players are going to be. I feel like we're just trying too hard to follow a certain structure and or a game plan that isn't working. How many times do we see Freo get absolutely pantsed on a behind, a kick in, because Sydney just didn't wait. They just went, and it was like 3 kicks later, boom, it was in their forward half and they were kicking for goal. Luckily, they were very, very inaccurate. Otherwise, this game could have been much, much different in the scoreline for draw, because Sydney just know if you just go against Freo, they're not going to know what's going on. They're going to get caught off guard. Amira had a really great game. Tracy was fantastic up forward. I'm really loving what he's doing. I'd love to see him get a miss back in the game. Driscoll was great through the middle as well. Sydney had obviously their stars as well. Warner, Jordan, Roberts. But Sydney didn't look that convincing either, if I'm to be completely honest. They looked like a team also kind of struggling. And it just made for a pretty meh game. Anyway, that's me, Jesse. Your thoughts?
Let's talk Sydney.
Did you just check notes?
No, I checked my watch.
Okay, good.
Because I need to make sure I have a clear runway for this.
Okay.
Let's talk Sydney.
Yes.
Both these sides played to me like they're not going to make finals in season 2025. That's how they played. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it's how they played.
Yeah.
However, Sydney wanted to win that game of football. And you touched on the free kick point, which I will come back to in a Fremantle context later. But you're spot on. Sydney had one idea, setting up out of defensive 50 from a stoppage. So a free kick to them, or a behind, or an out in the full, if Patrick Voss was kicking it. And that idea was to go. And that idea was to put pressure on Fremantle's defensive structure and force individual errors and create opportunities on the basis of quick ball movement. You don't have to do quick ball movement for 3 hours to employ a successful quick ball movement game plan. And Sydney led that game for 10 minutes, cumulatively, if that, and won the game of football. So as far as the smash and grab goes, could not have executed that any better. They get 4 points. They get that win they desperately needed. I feel off 2 pretty poor performances from a team that was in the grand final last year. Really 3 poor performances from a team that was in the grand final last year. But a win does wonders. Which is probably a good segue into Fremantle. Simply put, and I'm happy for you to clip this and put it on our Instagram, Liam. Simply put, while Justin Lomir is in that coach's box as a senior coach, Fremantle will not win a premiership. The last side to deploy a defensive game plan and win a premiership was West Coast in 2018, with their 15.1 meter short passing to build up to a goal opportunity, and thanks to elite players like Darling and Kennedy. And I know Darling gets maligned, but he is an elite forward, or certainly was in 2018.
Absolutely.
Kennedy was the best forward in the competition at that point. The opportunity is going to get converted. Josh Tracy is a very good forward. I think Josh Tracy has the potential of what we've seen in the last year and a half to be an elite forward. But right now, he's not 2018 Josh Kennedy. So he can't be that for Fremantle, which is fine because, again, that's upper echelon you're talking about there. And it's not fair to ask players to go and do that, especially when you've drafted them and you've brought them up through your system. Like, if you trade in a player with that expectation, sure. But Jai miss Josh Tracy, the 2 key forwards that will be the Fremantle Football Club key forwards, I would say, for the next 8 to 10 years. Neither are in that elite bracket where they can clunker a 1 in 3 with consistency and convert the goal 9 times out of 10. Which is a problem when you don't create opportunities. Now, right now, Fremantle are the most stale side in the competition. I don't think that's unfair, bias coloured by the fact I support the team. I have said innumerable times on this podcast, in conversations, boring football is fine with me if it's winning football.
Yeah.
What is not winning football is doing the exact same kicking from a behind 7 times and expecting a result to change. The only 2 times it worked was a skill error by, I believe, Campbell, who fumbled the ball and allowed Fremantle to go and get it back and take off. And when Jai mistook a big pack mark in the last quarter. For 3 consecutive stoppages, Fremantle tried this tactic. Sydney kicked 3 behinds. Fremantle either went direct via Luke Ryan to that 60-metre point on the corner of the centre square on the commentary box or the broadcast wing, or it was a short kick to, I believe, Geordie Clark, or maybe Clark kicked it to Ryan and then it was done. But essentially the same kick, just a slightly different angle. This football isn't working. This list is too good to squander on a coach that is 10 years behind his contemporaries. We talked about the top 5 coaches before in terms of, in the context of Ross Lyon and Chris Scott. I almost called him Ryan, just combine the 2 names. We talked about top 5 coaches. Right now we're talking about a bottom 2 coach in terms of coaching quality. Liam, what has actually changed in Fremantle's game plan since 2020, which was Justin Lemuel's first season? What has changed with the game? Keep in mind, 2020 was pre-stand rule. So the game is completely different. And somehow, at least visually, it looks like there's no material difference to the core principles of the game plan, which has delivered 1 final series in 5 years and is slipping alarmingly towards that being the case for 1 in 6.
What's changed, Jesse? We watch a lot of Freo football. And the fact that I can't definitively tell you that probably says all it needs to say. Bomb and pray seems to be how it is and how it will be until something else happens, until something changes. But I reckon we should just have one episode where we're just like, okay, Freo, it's all it is. Listen if you want to. We're going to go bananas on them.
If we lose the derby, we'll do a bonus episode where it's just Fremantle.
Okay. And this comes from a place of passion and love, not from hate. I don't want everyone to get this wrong. Like, we love this footy club. It's just really frustrating to see this list that we've got being used as they are. But we must stop there, Jesse. We must end the episode because otherwise we'll be here for days. So send the lovely people home. Exactly. Send the lovely people home.
I will, Liam. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the Centimetre Perfect AFL podcast, whether that was on your preferred podcasting platform or over on YouTube. If it is YouTube, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If it is your preferred podcasting platform, a review would do wonders. But the best review, of course, is a positive word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell your neighbours, tell your park run on Saturday, because we had a bit of a running theme this episode. So if you're doing your little 5K on a Saturday morning, first of all, if you're doing it at a bit more of a controlled pace, you can probably squeeze in most of this episode. Great start. Or if you just want to burn around turf, you just want to cut out all the conversation about the games and just listen to Jamara Ugle-Hagan, well, you can rate us as we try and get through it in that time so you can hit your 5K goals. Until next time, Liam, it's a pleasure as always. We'll see you for another edition of the Centimetre Perfect AFL podcast.
Bye, everybody.